Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the West Mesa Bone Collector. This is the name used to describe an unidentified serial killer who is said to be responsible for taking the lives of 11 different women whose remains were found buried in the desert of West Mesa in 2009. It is thought that this could be one person, or it could potentially be linked to some sort of group. There have been tips throughout the years and authorities have worked hard to try and get to the bottom of these crimes, but still the killer remains at large. There have been a few different suspects throughout the years, but there hasn't been enough concrete evidence to charge anyone with the crimes just yet. What's interesting about this case is that although the remains were found in 2009, according to authorities, upon examining satellite images, it is believed that the last of the remains were placed there in 2005. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Long Island serial killer. Also known as the Craigslist Ripper, the LISK is an unidentified suspect who is believed to have taken the lives of 10 to 16 people over the last 20 years. The victims so far that are known have been sex workers who used Craigslist to advertise their work. After the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert, police were searching an area along the Ocean Parkway, and that is when they began to discover the remains of the victims. The first 4 were found in December of 2010, with another 6 being found in March and April of 2011. As of December 2015, the FBI is now officially involved in the investigation. There has been a suspect in this case, but any formal charges have not been laid in terms of these crimes. The most recent evidence in regards to these cases was a belt found at the scene of the crime, which may potentially belong to the killer. At the same time, it was announced that new scientific evidence was being used in the investigation, but these announcements came just last year, so we have yet to receive any further updates. Hopefully this case is solved quickly so that the families of the victims can receive justice and this terrible person is off the streets for good. In our number 8 spot today, we have Richard Chase. This evil person is said to have taken the lives of 6 people within the span of a month between 1977 and 1978. That's a lot of people in a very short amount of time, which is absolutely terrifying. Before his crimes, Richard's life was already full of terrible stories and horrific acts that had him spending time in mental institutions before his crime spree. While at these facilities, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, but after going through treatment and beginning medication, he was deemed to no longer be a threat to society and was released into his mother's care. Here's where things take a turn for the worse, however. Instead of helping take care of Richard, his mother instead weaned him off of his medication and got him all set up with his own apartment. Nice. Really helpful and cool of her. Initially, when he moved into the apartment, he had roommates, but eventually they all moved out and he was alone, which is when things really got wild. He began killing various animals, which he would then eat raw, sometimes mixing the organs with Coca-Cola in a blender and then drinking it. It's horrible. After this, he would unfortunately go on his killing spree, which had horrific details and would only end when he was startled by a visitor at the home of where his final crime took place. He fled the scene, but he was later caught and stood trial. Although there were many attempts to have him be spared of the death sentence, in the end this didn't work. In December of 1980, Richard was found passed away in his jail cell after taking too many of his prescribed medication. In our number 7 spot today, we have RODNEY ALCALA. RODNEY is a horrible monster who was convicted and sentenced to death for 5 killings that he committed in California from 1977 to 1979. He also received an additional 25 years to life after pleading guilty to 2 other killings in New York in 1971 and 1977. RODNEY got away with his crimes for a while because he wasn't the top of the list of suspects, because he was said to be the quote charming photographer. RODNEY is often referred to as the dating game killer because of his appearance on the show, which, with what we now know about him, is absolutely horrifying. What's crazy is that he actually won the show he was on, but the episode's bachelorette refused to go on a date with him because she found him creepy. This is just a reminder to always trust your instincts. It isn't exactly known just how many victims RODNEY had. It is potentially thought that it could be much higher than the number he was convicted for. In July of last year, RODNEY passed away in prison at the age of 77. In our number 6 spot today, we have Charles Cullen. This guy used to be a nurse who took the lives of his patients throughout his career, and he may be one of the worst serial killers ever recorded. He confessed to taking the lives of 40 people, but through subsequent interviews, it became apparent that the number was way higher than 40, he just couldn't remember the names of all of them. But of course, he could remember the details of all of his crimes against them. His crimes started in 1988 and spanned over a decade into 2003. In October of 2003, when a patient at a hospital passed away from low blood sugar, the authorities were called. This person was Charles' final victim, and authorities began looking into him and investigating his past employment history. On December 12, 2003, authorities were arresting him and charging him with only one count of his crimes, but he ended up admitting to 40. He ended up pleading guilty to his crimes and arranged a plea deal where authorities would not seek the death penalty if he cooperated. During one of his court proceedings, he continuously asked the judge to step down and apparently repeatedly chanted for 25 minutes straight, even after he was restrained and gagged for his outbursts. It is thought that his victims might be up in the 400 range, which is truly just unbelievable. In our number 5 spot today, we have John Allen Muhammad and John Lee Malvo. This pair is referred to as the DC Snipers, and they were responsible for a series of coordinated attacks during a 3-week period in October of 2002. The pair took the lives of 10 people and critically injured 3 others during this spree, although their crimes spanned even before this and involved even more people. Their crimes were random and terrifying. People would just be going about their everyday tasks when this horrific pair would strike. Through a series of quote-unquote mistakes the pair made, they were able to be caught by authorities and arrested. In September of 2003, John Allen was sentenced to death, and this sentence was carried out in November of 2009. John Lee, on the other hand, was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences, but very recently it was determined that his sentence needs to be re-looked at because of his young age when the crimes were committed. In our number 4 spot today, we have Lawrence BITTAKER and Roy Norris. A 2-for-1 of the most horrific kind, this pair was often referred to as the toolbox killers. They received this name because most of what they used to commit their crimes would be items normally stored in a household toolbox. The pair committed 5 of these crimes in Southern California over a 5-month period in 1979. In the end, what led to their capture was when Roy met up with a friend with whom he had previously been incarcerated with. He confessed to the crimes to this person in great detail, and you know what this person did? They consulted their attorney about this horrifying confession, who then advised them to go to the authorities with the information. Thank goodness. Authorities, while they didn't have the evidence necessary to charge the men with the crimes at that time, were able to, through surveillance, find other things to arrest them for, while they searched their homes to find the evidence that they really did need. The pair stood trial, and in the end, Lawrence was sentenced to death, and Roy, who accepted a plea bargain and agreed to testify against Lawrence, received a life sentence. Lawrence died of natural causes while on death row in December of 2019, as did Roy at the California Medical Facility in 2020. FBI Special Agent John E. Douglas described Lawrence as the most disturbing individual for whom he has ever created a criminal profile. In our number 3 spot today, we have Robert Hansen. Robert is often referred to as the Butcher Baker, and his story truly is horrific. He is one of the most prolific serial killers in Alaska's history because for over a decade he would kidnap women and bring them into the wilderness, where he would then stalk them like prey. The reason he got away with his crimes for so long is because outside of these horrifying crimes, he was just a soft-spoken baker. Robert was heading to church by day and prowling the streets at night. What led to the downfall of this horrible monster was a badass named Cindy Paulson, who was able to escape from Robert and was sure to leave evidence behind. She then went to authorities and told them what happened, and this led to a search warrant for Robert's property, which is where all the evidence they needed lied. Robert is believed to have taken the lives of at least 17 women, and in 1983 he was sentenced to 461 years and a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In our number 2 spot today, we have William Bonin. This horrible person is said to be responsible for taking the lives of 21 young men in Southern California from May of 1979 to June 1980. It is said that on at least 12 of these occasions he was assisted by one of his 4 known accomplices, and it is even speculated that he might be responsible for 15 more of these crimes that evidence hasn't officially been able to connect him to. He was often referred to as the freeway killer because of the fact that most of the bodies were found along the freeway of Southern California. The police surveilled William until they could catch him in the act, which they did. In the beginning he claimed innocence. I mean, they caught him in the act, it's kind of dumb to claim innocence, but after receiving an impassioned letter from one of the victim's mothers, which asked him to please share the location of her son's body, he confessed his guilt. But he made sure to clarify that it wasn't so the mother could be at peace or so that her pain pain could be eased. No, of course not. Instead, he said, quote, "I was dying for a hamburger and I knew if I went out with the cops they would get me a hamburger." At his first trial, the prosecutor described him as, quote, "the most arch-evil person who ever existed." William was convicted on 14 of his crimes and was sentenced to death. He spent 14 years on death row before his sentence was carried out in 1996. In our number 1 spot today we have Israel Keyes. Israel is quite a prolific serial killer and truly is a terrifying person. While everyone on this list is horrible, Israel is particularly scary because of the fact that he had no MO or type. He just killed at random. In fact, he was so prepared for these random crimes that he left kill kits all over the US so that he would be prepared for whenever whoever he chose crossed his path. It isn't quite clear how many of these crimes he committed, and many missing persons reports that are still open could potentially be linked to him. It is said that Israel had a sort of admiration and obsession with other prolific serial killers like Ted Bundy or Robert Hansen, who we already talked about today. He even said, quote, "I probably know every single serial killer that's ever been written about. It's kind of a hobby of mine." So creepy. In March of 2012, Israel was finally apprehended and was to stand trial for his crimes, but unfortunately while waiting for trial, he went on to take his own life. He left behind a note and a drawing of 11 skulls, which led authorities to believe that this may be the number of victims he had. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Jacek Jaworek. This is a man who's on the run because of the horrible crimes he committed in July of last year. He took the lives of 3 people who were a part of his own family. One of the family members was able to escape this horrific nightmare and was able to make it safely to the neighbor's house where they could call the authorities for help. Since these horrific crimes, he has gone missing and no one is sure of his whereabouts. Right now it is speculated that he likely escaped from Poland where the crimes took place, but his exact whereabouts remain quite the mystery. In our number 9 spot today we have Victor and Natalia Wolf. We've got a 2-for-1 on this one, a husband and wife team like Bonnie and Clyde who are on the run for their alleged involvement in a massive real estate scheme. Of course, it's not a new idea to buy real estate for cheap and then sell it for more than you purchased it for, but these guys decided to go one step further and skip that whole first part. They wouldn't even buy the properties, they just sell them. They targeted immigrants mainly, and what they would do is drop fake ownership documents for properties and then basically just sell them, even though they obviously had no legal right to do that. By doing this, the pair was living in a lap of luxury. They had fancy jewelry, luxury cars that included a $350,000 Maybach. They were living out their dream, but this was back in the early 2000s, and everything changed when the housing bubble burst. In the end, the pair was indicted by a grand jury in 2011, but by then it was too late. The couple had fled and no one has been able to locate them since. They are said to have had ties in Florida, Arkansas, Texas, and New York, but authorities think that they might just be living in Russia. In our number 8 spot today we have the Beer Man. This is the surprisingly low-key name given to the unidentified serial killer who took the lives of at least 6 people in Mumbai, India between October 2006 and January of 2007. It's a lot of people in a very short amount of time. The reason this unidentified monster is called the Beer Man is due to one fact about each crime scene, which ended up being how they linked these crimes together in the first place. This was the presence of beer bottles that were found scattered next to each of the bodies that were found. Of course, it's been over a decade since the crimes were committed, so it's definitely upsetting that this person hasn't been caught yet. Mumbai police have investigated and interviewed hundreds of people, but still haven't quite collected the evidence they need to be certain of the suspect. In our number 7 spot today we have Joseph McCool. So Joseph was one part of a scheming trio. He, along with 2 other men named Cameron Campbell and Donald Manning, formed a company called Brixton Group. This group was built on promising a pretty stellar deal where an investment would guarantee you a 10% return per month, and that it was risk-free because the money was actually insured by the State Bar of California. And not only this, but also this money would be lent to countries that were experiencing war in Eastern Europe so that they would be able to purchase refrigerators for citizens who were impoverished. Wow, that's quite a deal, isn't it? I don't know, something about it seems too good to be true, but maybe that's because I know what happens next. Of course, in 2006 it turns out that a grand jury indicted the 3 men because, well, I mean, there were no fridges. there was no insurance as promised, and of course, there was no monthly return, 10% or otherwise. Both Cameron and Donald pleaded guilty to their charges of fraud and conspiracy, and they served their time for their crimes. But not good old Joe. No, of course, that guy has to flee and just disappear into the wind. Some authorities believe he may be hiding in Europe, while others believe he may be in the Philippines. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Honolulu Killer. This is another one of those pesky, horrifying, unidentified serial killers who, of course, was active in and around Honolulu, Hawaii. These crimes took place in 1985 and 1986, and throughout those years, it is said that whoever is responsible for these crimes took the lives of at least 5 women. The women seemingly didn't have any connection to each other as they were from all different walks of life, but because of the gruesome similarities of each crime, authorities were able to determine that they were likely committed by the same person. Despite the years it's been, the perpetrator has never been identified and could still be out there somewhere, hiding from taking responsibility for their actions. In our number 5 spot today, we have John and Julianne Demetrion. Back with another husband and wife team, this pair were mortgage brokers turned fraudsters. They were last seen in July of 2010, which was just before they were set to appear in a federal court in Honolulu to face the consequences of their schemes, which they had previously pled guilty to. Basically, the pair had another company called Mortgage Alliance, and this company would target homeowners who were in trouble and facing things like foreclosure. The pair would offer to purchase their homes and help repair their credit. They claimed that they would invest the funds, but rather than doing this, they instead kept the money for themselves to fund their expensive hobbies, which included collecting things like high-end electronics, airsoft replica firearms, and designer purses, shoes, and lingerie. At least they were using their money responsibly. You can tell that they just really needed it, which I respect. The pair has, of course, been on the run for over a decade now, which means that they truly could be anywhere, and authorities have received tips of their potential whereabouts from all over the world. Currently, there is a $10,000 reward that the FBI is offering for any information that leads to their arrest. In our number 4 spot today, we have Jason Derek Brown. This piece of work has been missing ever since November of 2004. That's quite a long time, but that doesn't mean authorities are giving up looking for him. Jason fled from Phoenix, Arizona in that year after he allegedly took the life of an armored car guard who was outside of a movie theater. After committing this horrific crime, he then took the money and ran. On the FBI website, where it details his crimes as well as other things about him and who to contact with any information, gives like a little bio on Jason, and in it says that he enjoys being the center of attention and that he clearly likes showing off his luxurious lifestyle. It's crazy how many of these people who are known for like trying to flaunt their actually stolen lifestyle. It's just wild. Another thing that the website reminds us of is that he should be considered armed and extremely dangerous, so just be careful out there. In our number 3 spot today, we have the I-70. This is the name of what is believed to be an unidentified serial killer who is known to have taken the lives of 6 store clerks in the Midwest in the spring of 1992. The reason he is referred to as the I-70 killer is because most of the stores were just a few miles off of Interstate 70. While most of his victims were women, there was one man, but it is believed that he may have been expecting a female employee. The killings were clearly the main objective of his crimes, considering the fact that at each scene there was only a small amount of cash that was taken. Aside from these initial 6 crimes, it is thought that he also might be responsible for the deaths of 3 more store clerks in Texas in 1993 and 1994, as well as 1 more in Indiana in 2001. This story has been featured on episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, America's Most Wanted, and Dark Minds, but despite this, whoever is responsible has never been identified. In our number 2 spot today, we have Victor Guerrena. Back in September of 1983, Victor was 25 years old and was a trusted employee of the West Hartford, Connecticut Wells Fargo Express Company, but on September 12th, that all changed. After working throughout the day and completing the scheduled rounds of currency collection from the local banks, Victor held his co-workers hostage before tying them up, handcuffing them, and injecting them with a mysterious substance he claimed would leave them unable to move. After doing this, Victor proceeded to take about $7 million, which was one of the largest cash robberies robberies in US history at the time. His co-workers were later able to get themselves untied and they called authorities, but by that time Victor was gone. They found his car, but it had been abandoned, and of course the money was gone. They later found out that Victor was a part of a larger group who had orchestrated this entire thing, and they also found out that part of the money was used to purchase a surface-to-air missile that was later launched at FBI headquarters in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Thankfully, it turned out to be a huge waste of money because it did little damage, and fortunately no one was injured. 2 years later, there were 14 people who were arrested in Puerto Rico, Massachusetts, and Texas as they were found to be involved in the entire operation, but Victor once again escaped capture and has not been seen since. In our number 1 spot today we have Glenn Stewart Godwin. Man, this guy definitely has quite the history. So basically, in 1980, Glenn was working in California and didn't really have too much of a criminal record. For some reason, he and his roommate, however, decided to make a plan to rob someone that they knew who was once a friend of theirs. Of course, things go awry and it turns into a botched robbery, and Glenn ends up taking the life of the person that they were robbing. Also, this isn't necessarily important to what we were talking about today, but it's just so unhinged I couldn't leave it out. In an attempt to destroy the evidence, Glenn tried to blow up the crime scene. The explosive went off, but obviously they were still able to figure out who committed the crime. Both Glenn and his roommate were both tried and convicted for the crimes in 1983. This of course is not where the story ends, however. In 1987, Glenn tried to escape prison and failed, and this landed him at a higher security prison, Folsom State Prison, which is actually a maximum security prison. Somehow, once at this new one though, he attempted another escape and this time was successful. He fled to Mexico where he tried unsuccessfully to be a part of an illegal drug trade. He was arrested again and sentenced in Mexico, and this is when American authorities began the process of trying to get him extradited. During this process, Glenn decided that it would be a brilliant idea to take the life of an inmate who was a member of the Mexican drug cartel, which very obviously slowed the process of extradition. This gave him time to plan another escape, which he did in 1991, and since then he has been on the run. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Angel Resendez. Also known as the Railroad Killer, Angel is said to have committed somewhere around 23 horrific crimes during his spree in both the United States and Mexico in the 1990s. He went on to become known as the Railroad Killer because of the fact that most of his crimes were committed near railroads, where he had just jumped off of trains he was using to travel around the country. Most of his crimes took place in the homes of those he harmed, and usually after the crimes he'd linger around to eat their food and sometimes steal their sentimental items. Sometimes he'd even take jewelry to re-gift to his mother and sister. In June of 1999, he was listed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, and when his sister saw him there, she was worried he would continue harming people, so she thankfully contacted the authorities. After this, they were able to convince him to surrender and he was sent to trial. In the end, he was sentenced to death by the jury, and although there were multiple appeal attempts, his death warrant was signed, and on June 27, 2006, he received his sentence. In our number 9 spot today, we have the River City Ripper. One of the most terrifying things that exists are serial killers who are still on the loose, especially when you find out that they've been recently active. This serial killer is wanted in connection to 4 different incidents that occurred in Little Rock, Arkansas, 3 of which were fatal. These horrific crimes took place between August of 2020 and April of 2021, and despite one of the victims thankfully surviving the attack and being able to provide a description of the assailant, there is still very little to go on in terms of being able to identify this horrible human. The FBI was contacted shortly after the survivor was able to give a testimony to authorities, and their behavioral analysis team created a profile of this unidentified killer. These crimes are terrible any way you spin them, but one of the most terrifying parts is that they were all just completely random acts of violence that occurred just unprovoked. The case has gained quite a bit of attention, but still, the monster remains at large. In our number 8 spot today, we have Ruja Ignatova. This woman is a convicted fraudster who has been on the run since 2017 after she disappeared when she was found out to be the founder of a Ponzi scheme. The scam, known as OneCoin, which was a scam that was surrounding cryptocurrency, has been referred to as one of the biggest scams in history. US prosecutors have claimed that the scheme was so huge it brought in approximately $4 billion worldwide. Ruja had impeccable timing as she disappeared right at the time that there was a secret US warrant being filed for her arrest. Despite being on the run since 2017, in 2019 she was charged in absentia by US authorities for wire fraud, securities fraud, as well as money laundering. This lady is living the real life Ozark. It's absolutely insane. This case truly is something you'd expect to see on TV, but she's just living it. Despite the years it's been, international authorities are still doing their best to find out where she has been hiding, and this includes raids that have happened just this year. In our number 7 spot today, we have the vending machine killer. Okay, so for this one, we have to know that apparently there are a lot of vending machines in Japan. Like, it's said that there's one for every 23 people. It's a lot of vending machines. So in 1985 in Hiroshima, there were 12 people who passed away and 35 people who were seriously injured from being poisoned with a chemical herbicide. When the string of poisonings were investigated, authorities realized that they had one thing in common, and that was the fact that they had all had the same drink shortly before falling ill. So around the time of this whole thing, there was a company that had launched a marketing campaign where they gave a free drink with every purchase made from a vending machine. When people didn't want their free drink, they would leave it on top of the vending machine for the next person who came along, which is super nice and thoughtful and kind, and of course that means that some horrible person out there had to ruin it for everyone. So, as it turns out, someone was taking these drinks, lacing them with poison, and then leaving them on top of the machines for some random stranger to come around, drink it, and then be sick or unfortunately pass away. It is almost impossible for authorities to be able to track down whoever was doing this, because you have to narrow down where the person picked up the drink, and in 1985 there weren't as many CCTV cameras as there are now. So unfortunately, whoever was responsible for a mass poisoning of strangers is still out there somewhere. In our number 6 spot today, we have Jan Marsalek. Jan is said to be a white-collar criminal who fled and went into hiding in June 2020 after the Wirecard scandal, as he was the COO of the company. If you're unfamiliar, Wirecard was a German payment processing firm that had years and years of allegations of malpractice against them. The entire thing really came to a peak in 2019 when the Financial Times published some of the investigations into the complaints, as well as internal documents. In the end, in 2020, Wirecard filed for insolvency after it was realized that 1.9 billion euros were missing. If anyone finds that missing $1.9 billion, my DMs are wide open. It is believed that Jan is one of the main culprits in the entire scandal, and to be fair, fleeing the country doesn't really make you look very innocent. It is believed that he may be located in Russia now, but since August of 2020, Interpol has issued a red notice for him, which requests that worldwide law enforcement be on the lookout for him in order to arrest him, where he can then be extradited. In our number 5 spot today, we have Bible John. This is the name used in reference to an unidentified serial killer who was responsible for Scotland's largest manhunt. All 3 of his victims were young brunette women between the ages of 25 to 32, and they had all met him at the Barrel and Ballroom, which was a dance and music venue in Glasgow. Despite this important information, he has never been able to be identified. This was actually the first time in Scotland in which the Crown Office authorized the publication of a composite drawing of the man who was suspected of the crimes. The reason he is called Bible John is said to be because he apparently repeatedly quoted the Bible, which is, I don't know, just really creepy. Most of the key information in the investigation came from one of the victim's sisters, Jean Langford, who had been in the same taxi as her sister and the suspected killer on the night he took her life. She was able to give a description of the man and was able to give information that helped authorities create a profile of him. Despite her incredibly helpful information, he was never able to be caught, and Jean passed away in 2010. While Bible John might have also passed away by now, I still hope that one day authorities can figure out who he was. In our number 4 spot today, we have Monica Witt. Monica is a former United States Air Force technical sergeant as well as a defense contractor who has been on the run since 2018. Despite her high-ranking position and high security clearance, she is on the run because she defected to Iran in 2013. It is said that from 2013 up until she was found out that she was using her position in order to spy on the United States and relay that information back to the group she was working for. She used different fake Facebook accounts, and it is said that the information she gave included the classified true name and counterintelligence activities of a US intelligence operative. This is of course a problem regardless of how important this operation was, but it is said that this information she shared had the potential to cause serious damage to the United States national security. It is an absolutely wild story, and Monica is still out there on the run, hiding from the consequences of her betrayal and espionage. espionage. In our number 3 spot today we have John Pyle. This horrible human isn't an undercover spy or insane fraudster. He is just a monster who committed certain crimes that are unfortunately a little more common than any of us would like to know. Because of the nature of his crimes, I can't talk about them here in this video, but let's just say that he is definitely one of the worst kinds of criminals out there. On June 24th, 2016, authorities searched his home after receiving 3 tips relating to his crimes. The amount of and the severity of the incriminating evidence they found during this search ended up landing him charged with 30 different second-degree felonies, which could bring a sentence of 450 years in prison. He was arrested the same day and posted a bail bond of $90,000. Why he was able to get bail, I'll never know. And he also had to surrender his passport. Flash forward 16 months to October 23rd, 2017, and of course, this guy doesn't show up for his hearing, and thus we have a fugitive on the run. Even though he gave up his passport, it is said that he was still somehow able to board a Carnival cruise ship that was bound for Cozumel, Mexico. He got off the ship when it arrived and never reboarded. Despite efforts from international authorities as well as bounty hunters, he has still yet to be located. The last time he was seen was in February of 2018 in Nuevo Leon. In our number 2 spot today we have Alejandro Castillo. Alejandro is an American man who was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list in October of 2017. He was added to the list after disappearing after taking the life of a woman named Sandy Lai Lee. Sandy was a co-worker of his, and it is said that the two might have briefly dated. Basically, apparently, she had lent him some money that he had never repaid. On August 9th, 2016, Alejandro texted Sandy saying that he would like to repay her, and they agreed to meet at a quick trip. Alejandro was driven to this meeting by Amaya Feaster, who is said to be his new girlfriend. It is believed that once at the meeting, instead of repaying her, Alejandro forced Sandy to take out all of the money from her bank account, which is said to have been about $1,000. After this, the pair drove Sandy to a wooded area where it is said that he then took her life. After this, the pair fled the scene of the crime and drove from North Carolina to Phoenix, Arizona. They then ended up fleeing into Mexico from there. While Amaya turned herself into authorities on October 20th, 2016, Alejandro remains at large and on the run. Despite the years it's been, I hope that one day he is found so he can be brought to justice for this horrible, senseless crime. In our number 1 spot today we have Bhadrash Kumar Patel. This is a man who, in 2015, was in the United States in Hanover, Maryland with his wife Palak. It is said that the pair were traveling to visit relatives and that they had both taken a job at a local Dunkin' Donuts that was owned by one of their family members. It was at this location that on April 12th, 2015, it is said that he took the life of his wife. Surveillance footage shows the two of them walking together in the kitchen around 9:30 p.m. that day before they disappear out of view behind some racks that were in the kitchen. Shortly after this, he reappears alone, turns the oven off, and leaves. Authorities believe that this all may have been over an argument where one of the couple wanted to return to India while the other wanted to stay in the United States. After customers of the store began getting worried when no one came to take their order, they thankfully decided to approach a nearby police officer. The officer went to investigate, and that is when he sadly found her body. The last sighting of him was on April 13th at around 10 a.m. at Newark Penn Station in New Jersey. He had taken a hotel shuttle there and has never been seen since. There is currently a $100,000 reward for information that leads to his whereabouts. It truly is an unimaginable horror, and I hope that this monster is one day brought to justice.